We ask the question, what is needed in the world?
He's been described as an enigma in Kenyan politics, and you can't possibly talk about politics in Kenya without mentioning the name Raila Odinga. He contested for the presidency 4 times and says he was cheated of victory in 3 of those elections. In the current post-election crisis, Raila says he will not rest until there are fresh presidential elections. He talked to Al Jazeera. Mr. Raila Odinga, welcome to Talk to Al Jazeera. You've been reacting to the results of the recent election, which you have rejected and said that the election should not be allowed under any circumstances. What are your reasons for that?
These were a sham elections. In other words, in our view, they never took place. And that these results should not be allowed to stand, because it will give a very bad example to our future generation who are watching what's happening here. Is this really elections? Is this how elections should be held in Africa? Why should Africa be judged by lower standards compared to the rest of the world? And that's the reason why we say that we want to be the people who will do away with the election rigging on the African continent, to show that African people deserve a better standard than what they are seeing right now.
But you boycotted these elections voluntarily. You stood in front of the media and said you were withdrawing from the election process. I mean, you, of all people, should not be allowed to pass any judgment on an election that you quit on your own.
It's precisely because I withdrew that these elections should not be allowed to stand. As you know, we went to the Supreme Court and challenged the election results of the elections of the 8th of August. And we provided sufficient evidence that there was massive rigging of those elections. The Supreme Court agreed with us and said that those elections were not held in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of the country, and directed the Electoral Commission to go and do it. And they say that there were irregularities and illegalities which needed to be addressed. On that basis, we came out and prepared a 12-point document, which we call the reducible minimum conditions that needed to be implemented to ensure that there was a level playing field, to avoid a repeat of what happened on the 8th of August. The Electoral Commission refused to respond positively to those points which we raised. Then we realized that the ground was not level. Going back to the election was just basically going for a repeat. That is, doing the same thing, the same way, expecting different results. And we said that it was a charade, it was going to be a waste of time and a waste of our resources. On that basis, we decided to pull out of the elections. In spite of that, the Electoral Commission still went ahead and put our names on the ballot paper. But not only that, one of the 7 commissioners, Madam Roslyn Akombe, resigned 10 days to the election and actually fled the country, citing insecurity and threat, and said that the Electoral Commission cannot provide free and fair elections.
You went to the Supreme Court challenging the results of the August 8th elections. The Supreme Court in its verdict agreed with some of the issues you had raised in court and nullified the elections. But again, in its verdict said it is the current Electoral Commission as constituted that would be holding the elections in 60 days. You knew what you were getting into from the onset, Mr. Odinga, didn't you?
Yeah, the Supreme Court directed the Electoral Commission to do a repeat poll in line with the constitution and the laws of the country, and to address the illegalities and irregularities which had been discovered.
But they were not specific in saying who should be blamed and who should handle that. They said the current Electoral Commission should organize elections within 60 days.
Correct. Within 60 days in accordance with the rules, and to address the irregularities and illegalities. So now the details now was left to the Electoral Commission. And we identified those details. First, we had one of the contentious issues was the printing of electoral materials, including the ballot papers, which had been given to a company in Dubai called Al Ghurair, and which came up with a lot of dubious materials, which were found to not to comply with the specifications. The other one was the transmission of the results, what you call the KIMS system, Kenya Integrated Electronic Management System, which was set up by a French company called Otimofo. Then the other one were the officials, some of them who had committed perjury in the court by swearing false affidavits. There are those who had hacked into the system and had posted false results. And this had been discovered through a verification which had been ordered by the courts. Then there are the other officials, particularly the ICT manager, who had refused to comply with the court order to allow our experts access to the server so that we could inspect the results of the elections as contained in the server. Then there was the head of the Electoral Commission himself, who also had committed perjury.
Well, regarding the rerun results, you say numbers don't add up. What proof do you have?
Well, we've got the report from the IBC itself, what you're going to call the whistleblowers within the IBC. Also the Safaricom, which was the major service provider who did the transmission of
the telecommunication company, you mean?
Exactly. Telecommunication company, the service providers. There was Safaricom, there's Orange, and there's Airtel, who are transmitting.
The ruling party says one of the reasons for the low turnout was because people were stopped from going to the polling stations. Roads and highways were closed by your supporters, and that you and your party actually took part in acts of sabotage to sabotage the elections.
I went on a live television interview and I urged my supporters not to turn up to vote, but not to stop anybody who wanted to go and vote. But, as you know, voting in this country is voluntary. It is not mandatory unlike countries like Australia. So people can decide not to go and vote. They can decide to do a procession and just to express their anger at the impunity that was being exercised by the government and the Electoral Commission, at the excessive deployment of security forces around their places of residence. That itself offends people and annoys people. Those youth were basically confronting the security agencies.
No, they were not doing only that, Mr. Odinga. I was at Kibera, the Olympic Primary School, where some of your supporters broke through the wall. They destroyed the wall first and set fire on the classrooms, and police had to use the water cannons to put it out. This was done in your name, Mr. Odinga.
No, the fact the school where the wall was broken there is actually called Raila Odinga Education Center. I sponsored that school. I built it myself. But then there were security officers inside. So the youth were actually fighting with the security officers. They were not blocking anybody from going to vote.
Well, the government had to do what it had to do to ensure voting took place.
Yes, I'm saying that people I'm saying that confrontation, of course, was unnecessary. I'm not really praising it, but I'm also blaming the government for over-deployment of security forces in the area. You can say that by and large there was a general boycott of the elections. And I would say that it is wrong to try to attribute this to interference.
The turnout was 38+%. Uhuru says he got, the Electoral Commission says President Uhuru Kenyatta garnered more than 7 million votes. That's not very far from the mark of what he got in the August 8 elections.
From the records that we know, and even from the media's own story, those who went around the country, they tell you turnout was pretty low. And we are surprised that in the end, they say here that 70% of the people voted.
You've said that you were turning your National Super Alliance coalition into a resistance movement, and you will be carrying out acts of civil disobedience. What do you want to achieve?
We are talking about peaceful resistance to authoritarianism. We're not talking about armed resistance or the use of violence. You will say that we detest violence as a way of bringing about change in the country.
You're saying more protests on the streets of the major cities of this country, which would result in violence automatically, because as it's known to be, clashes between the police and your supporters. And this is just hurting this country, Mr. Odinga. Why don't you just agree and accept that you've been outsmarted and move on?
I've not talked about violence. I'm talking about non-violent means of bringing about change in this country. And I've mentioned our constitution. In the human rights section, talks about the right to demonstrate, the right to picket, the right to protest, the right to boycott, and the right to petition. All these are perfectly legal. So what the violence is never meted out by the members of the public. It is the authorities who, instead of providing security to the people, once they have been notified that you're going to do a procession, usually resort to use of violence against innocent people.
These protests are not just protests. They are a continuation of a process that started way back in June. And the economy is suffering. Tourism is at an all-time low. People are losing their jobs. Why do you want to drag the country through, even a longer and elongated political process?
This is the easy option, which is what the government wants. Accept and move on. Then what happens next time? Next time, there will be complete apathy in this country. No Kenyans will turn up to vote at all. And this is what leads to what you call electoral autocracy on the African continent. There are now countries in this continent where in an election, only 10% or 20% of the population turns up to vote. And the president then will get 98% of the vote because he is running alone. This is what has happened here, for example. This is not what we want. We want a vibrant democracy in our country. So we are concerned about violence and the loss of lives of our people. At the same time, we must canvass for change in this society. We cannot accept this kind of imposition of leadership on our people, because otherwise our democracy is going to collapse. And we have a duty not only to ourselves, but to the future generation of our country. Next time, I will not probably be a candidate, but then there will be another candidate, and that candidate will suffer the same fate.
Are you saying you will be satisfied with just reforms in the Electoral Commission and what you call electoral justice, And once that is done, you will be fine and continue with your life.
This country is bigger than all of us. But at the same time, we must conclude this electoral cycle. It's not yet concluded.
The Electoral Commission says it is.
According to them, why did they have to repeat it? And they repeat it and bungle it again, like they bungled the first one. That's why it is still an unfinished business. It is not done until it is done.
Aren't you being unfair to the millions who turned out to vote on the 26th of October?
Assuming Uhuru Kenyatta got the 7.4 million votes, which I know he did not get. I know he got 3.5 million. Still, there are 12 million Kenyans who did not vote for him on that particular day. So those who did not vote for him are more than those who voted for him. I think it is that majority that I'm talking on whose behalf I'm talking. And I think that that majority deserves to be listened to.
Your opponents describe you as a sore loser, a man who never accepts defeat.
I don't really care what they say about me because I don't expect them to compliment me. In 2013, what happened this in 2017, exactly what happened. We went to court. The court said that our evidence was produced late. So it dismissed the evidence and then went on to award the victory to our opponent. And we said, we don't agree, but we respect the ruling of the Supreme Court. And we urge our supporters not to protest.
So what you're saying is...
How can I be called a sour loser?
So what you're saying is you contested 4 times and you've been robbed of what you call your victory.
3 times.
3 times.
Yes.
That must say a lot about you too.
Yes. But yeah, I'm just saying, and I'm not at it because Raila Odinga is a power hungry. Raila Odinga just wants to see democracy properly established in our country. Either we have autocracy, where elections are just a ritual, where the incumbents do them after every 5 years and to just entrench themselves, or it is a true competition where there's a possibility of the opponent to also win.
President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto say that while they're ready to dialogue with you, they're not ready to discuss something outside the current constitution. This sets the stage for a confrontation, doesn't it, given what you've called for, the protests and the demos and the picketing?
I've seen Mr. Ruto saying he's ready to discuss with me my retirement package. My retirement package is in the constitution and in the law. I don't need any kind of favoritism from Mr. Ruto about my retirement package. They refused to even give it to me since I retired as a Prime Minister of this country. But that is a subject for another day. Here I'm talking about electoral justice. And it is not Raila Odinga speaking. I'm talking on behalf of millions of the people of this country who actually matter. They have taken the Electoral Commission hostage. So they are basically running against themselves. So they're telling you that they won fair and square. They were the only players. They were the referee and the players. As actually confessed by the chairman of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Chebukati, had told me that he was going to either petition the Supreme Court for extension of time or he was going to resign.
Which he didn't.
Neither.
Yes.
So tell you that there's a threat to his life. Because of that, he had to do what he had to do.
Well, we've not proved that, Mr. Odinga, but just to jog your memory, the Electoral Commission before the current one, you had a big problem with, and you hounded them out of office with demonstrations and mass action by calling on your supporters to take to the streets. And now, in the formation and constitution of the current Electoral Commission, you had a big role in it. And actually, Chebukati is a man who belonged to your party once and even contested on your party's ticket, a constituency in Western Kenya. You can't possibly be complaining about an Electoral Commission that you had such a big role in constituting.
You know, it is not just the commission. And we said it. We said that we don't just want to remove the commissioners. We want to overhaul the Electoral Commission. Because the rot is not just with these people. The rot was more inside the secretariat. The Jubilee refused completely to do that. And these commissioners were coming very late in the day, when the mischief had already been done. And this we also said at that time, that maybe it may be too little too late. They refused to remove the heads of the various departments who are in the turn responsible for the mess. That's why we say that this is not something that is just at the top.
In 2007, you said the election was rigged in favor of then President Kibaki, then called on your supporters to come out, and then ensued those post-election unrest that Kenya is famous for now. 1,100 people killed. Now, since August, 60 Kenyans have died. How many more lives would it take before you politicians come to your senses and agree on something?
You see, the events of 2007 are very unfortunate, and they still etch the memories of the people of this country. They came as a result of electoral injustice, because what had happened was we were leading by over 1 million votes when and it was being broadcast live on television stations in the country. When the government then ordered all the television stations to stop live coverage of the results, and then directed the remaining returning officers to report to the headquarters of the National Intelligence Service, where the results were now doctored. And they only now said that, oh, Mr. Odinga is still leading, but Mr. Kibaki is fast closing the gap. At the end, when they announced that Kibaki had won, the country imploded. And the result is what you have just said at that time. Very unfortunate indeed. Everybody knows, and even Mr. Kibaki knows, that he lost his election. I was then prevailed upon to allow Mr. Kibaki to finish his term and then be content with the position of a prime minister, which was created in the constitution. Okay, so those who say I'm power hungry do not understand history, or they deliberately try to distort history. If Hussein, I just became content and said, okay, I'm quitting the political scene. Let this be the way it is. Next time around, a majority of Kenyans will not go to vote. They will say, why do I waste my time?
So you're saying nothing but fresh elections will convince you?
Not me.
Yes.
Kenyans, majority of Kenyans. For the first time on the African continent, a presidential election was overturned by a Supreme Court. We don't want to let the Supreme Court down. They have been disparaged. They've been called names. They've been called traitors, crooks, criminals who have...
You attacked them too after the 2013 verdict, didn't you?
I did not. What I said in 2013, and you go into your archives, I said I don't agree, but I respect the verdict of the Supreme Court.
How far are you ready to go, Mr. Odinga, with this new campaign of yours, this new mission of yours?
Kenyans will get what they want. And I am convinced that the Kenyan spirit, the Kenyan dream, as coined by the founding fathers of our nation, shall be realized. Eventually, Kenyans will get the leaders that they deserve.
Mr. Raila Odinga, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much, Mohammed.